Morning, moms. You've got this. Yes, yes. This is the toughest job. So, first service, I said, this is one of the toughest jobs in the world. A mom came up after the whole thing, and she said, you got one thing wrong. It's the toughest job. All right, so it's the toughest job in the world, and so we're here this morning just to acknowledge and to celebrate you and the good work that you are doing. And really, as I thought about it, because I had a mom, so I got to watch my mom do the mom thing. I helped create a mom, so I watched. Well, I did. That was. Is that weird? All right. I'm sure I'll hear about it. But I watched Marilyn in this role of mom, and one of the things I realized is it's not a job, it is a myriad of jobs. There are all kinds of jobs that go into being a mom, and so as I was reflecting on that, I started listing some of the jobs that moms have, and so here's a partial list that I came up with. So being a mom is, one of the jobs is caregiver, activities director, Uber driver, economist, crisis counselor, party planner, waste management engineer, psychologist, job foreman, restaurateur, chief investigator, and comforter. So all of these jobs and so many more go into what it means to be a mom. And it's a demanding job. There is no respite. There's no time off. There's no getting away from it. Even when you are away from the kids, you are still mom. So you've got all of this responsibility, and on top of it, your clients are often unhappy with your performance, right? And just as we saw on the video, everybody has an opinion about how to parent kids well. So one of the things that I think I've discovered in watching all of this in my own life and in the lives of so many is that there is a spectrum of ways to parent well. There is no one way to parent well. And it has to do with who you are as a woman. It has to do with who the kids are that God entrusted to your care. And all kinds of things play into this. There's a whole lot of ways to parent well. And I know the insecurities that go along with it as well, because you're never quite sure, am I doing it right? Am I getting it right? Am I giving enough or too much? And all of those questions. I remember when our kids were small and Marilyn, feeling so insecure about her parenting. I had no problem with this. I knew I was a great dad. She worried about, was she a great mom? And so she would say periodically, I know that Josh is going to end up on Oprah telling the world what a terrible mom I was. You've got this. You've got this. The one thing that I would say is that you need to remember, for those of you who are raising kids in the younger years right now, that you are not raising children. You are raising adults. They're children for a very short period of time. And so having a right focus on what ultimately it is that you're trying to do as you raise women and men to go out into the world. One of the things I hear so often that I want to just challenge is all I want is for my kids to be happy. All I want is for my kids to be happy. Want more than that. See, the problem with having happiness as the value that you're raising your kids with is, one, it's self-centered. It's all about me being happy. Is that the kind of adult you want to put out into the world? that their whole focus is on their happiness. The other thing about happiness is it's so fleeting. What makes me happy today won't make me happy tomorrow. And I'm in this endless pursuit of seeking happiness. So I get what you're saying, but really I think a better value to instill in your kid is to be good. To be good. That we want to raise our kids to be good. And as followers of Christ, our understanding of good is that they live lives that are honoring to God, that are consistent with God's will and God's way. And that's our desire for our kids. And if we can instill some of that value into our kids, they're going to find meaning and purpose in their lives. They're going to have an outward focus, I think. And along the way, they'll probably find a lot of happiness. And if not, they will certainly find joy. So that's my little spiel on child rearing. That's free. It wasn't even, that's free. Anyway, for what it's worth. One of the other jobs that moms have is conflict negotiator. If you're a mom, you're a conflict negotiator. Whether you have one kid or multiple kids, you are a conflict. Because kids, especially if you have more than one, they're in conflict with each other, right? All the time, they're in conflict with each other. They're in conflict with their friends. They're in conflict with their teachers, with their coaches. They're in conflict within themselves. They're in conflict with you. So you are in this kind of conflict negotiator role. We are in this series, the end of the series, where we've been talking about conflict and what it means for us to navigate through conflict in ways that are God-honoring. One of the things that we've been saying in this series is that conflict is normal. It's not unusual. It's not strange. Conflict is normal. It's normal in families. It's normal in communities. It's normal in the church. Because we're different, right? We have different priorities. We have different personalities. We have different perspectives and plans. And when you bring that in with other people, there's bound to be some conflict. It's normal. Conflict is normal. So don't be surprised, when there are people who come to church and they think, the church, they're in conflict and that's it's normal. It's part of being human. Conflict is normal. We've also been saying that conflict is an opportunity to make things better. It's not a guarantee, but it's an opportunity to make things better. If I go through conflict well, in a God-honoring way, it can actually make things better. Even if it doesn't end up in agreement, it can make things better. So a couple of weeks ago, Pastor Steve, and talking about this, we're looking, by the way, at the book of James. We're drawing insights from the book of James in this series. And Pastor Steve, looking at chapter 1, talked about words. Words. That we can use our words in constructive ways and in destructive ways when it comes to conflict. And so we need to be careful about the words that we use and try to use words that build people up, that are life-giving and not tearing people down. So we need to pay attention to our words. And last week I talked about our internal work that we have to do. And that's where I want to pick up again this morning, is the internal work that we have to do in order to navigate through conflict well. All right? So for that, I'm going to be looking at the 4th chapter of the book of James, and just 2 sections of that 4th chapter, verses 1 through 3, and then verses 6 through 10. Okay? And so if you have your Bible, you can take that out. If you got a Bible app, you can look at that, or the words will be on the screen. All right? So James 4, beginning with verse 1, says this. What is causing the quarrels and fights among you? Don't they come from the evil desires at war within you? You want what you don't have, so you scheme and kill to get it. You are jealous of what others have, but you can't get it, so you fight and wage war to take it away from them. yet you don't have what you want because you don't ask God for it. And even when you ask, you don't get it because your motives are wrong. You want what gives you pleasure or happiness. So James is talking about this internal thing going on in you. What's causing all of the upset? What's causing all of this ruckus? And he turns the spotlight on you and says, what's going on in you? And there may be evil desires in you. Jesus said, out of the fullness of the heart, the mouth speaks. What's going on in your heart is what's coming out of your mouth. What's going on in your heart is how you are going to move through conflict. And so if you've got all of these evil desires going on in you, it can't help but affect the way that you enter into conflict. And then James mentions 3 specific things that are at war within us. He talks about envy. Envy is believing that what somebody has, they don't deserve. That's a perspective of envy. They don't deserve that. He talks about jealousy. Jealousy is when you want what somebody else has. They have it, but you want it. And then anger. Anger is this view of others with hostility. You're viewing the other person with hostility, anger. Have you ever heard of the 7 deadly sins? That's 3 of them. Envy, jealousy, anger. Right? So James says, and you know what got left out of here? As you're quarreling and fighting with each other, you've left God out. You're not even asking God. You've put God on the shelf. You're just looking at the others and saying, they don't deserve that. And it's not just about material things. It's not, that car or that clothes or that house. It could be anything. They don't deserve that family. They don't deserve that job. They don't deserve that position. They don't deserve those accolades. I should be getting them. That should be me. Right? So all of that kind of stirring around, and then it just fuels an anger, a hostility in you towards others, and God gets left out of the equation. There's all of this stuff boiling within us. And then he talks about the world, right? So we're living in this kind of duality. We've got one foot in the world, and when he's talking about the world, he's talking about a perspective of life divorced from God, right? That's the world, a perspective of life divorced from God. God's not in the equation. And so it's all about me, right? I'm the source of all truth. I'm the source of what's right and wrong. I'm the source of all priorities. It's about me. That's the world. And then we have a foot in, the kingdom of God, where we got this other thing pulling on us. Look at what he said. Verse 3 again. Listen to what he said. And even when you ask, you don't get it because your motives are all wrong. Your motives are all wrong. It's about what's motivating you. What's motivating you is what you bring into a conflict. So that's why it's important. Essential. If we're going to do conflict well, if we're going to be making things better as we move through conflict, we need to be paying attention to what's going on inside of us. And that's counterintuitive, right? When we're in conflict, my natural inclination is to look at the other person, what they're doing, what they're saying, how they're acting, and judge all of the stuff that they've got going on, rather than looking at what's going on in me. The key for this to happen, in order to look at this properly, there's a key that I have to keep in mind. And it's described in a single word. And that word is found in this next section of James that we're going to read together. In fact, it appears 3 different times. Okay? You were really good at picking out the moms and getting those names right. Let's see if you can get this. There's another quiz. Who knew you were going to get quizzed this morning, right? So we're going to read from James chapter 4, verses 6 through 10. And rather than me read it to you, we're going to read it together. Listen as you read. Look at the words and see if you can pick out what's that word, this key to doing this well. All right, so here it is. As the scriptures say, let's read this together. And so humble yourselves before God. Resist the devil. Did you catch the word? Good. Humble, right? 3 different times he talks about humility. Humble yourself before the Lord. Humble yourself. When you humble yourself, God will lift you up. What is humility? Humility is putting yourself second, right? Humble yourself before God. God, I want your way first. I want your will. I want your way before my will and my way. I'm humbling myself before you. God, I want to put you first. There's a further level of humility in this that we're called to as well, to humble ourselves before others. That we view ourselves from the perspective of even less than, but at least equal to others, not superior to others. That our will, our way is superior to others. So we humble ourselves before God and before others. The opposite of humility is to do it my way. And that's the way of the world. Okay? Can I tell you a little secret? Okay? You'll keep this, right? Just you guys. And the people at First Service, and people who listen on the podcast and YouTube. But that's it. All right? No further. The conflicts in my marriage that have gone badly over the years have gone badly because I didn't humble myself. I entered into that conflict with the priority being me. What I want, what I think I need, what I deserve. Not looking at my wife, not looking at my marriage or my family, but my eyes on me. It was a failure to be humble. Christian marriage is defined best in Ephesians chapter 5. And it starts with verse 20, and it says this: submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, submit to your husbands. Husbands, sacrifice for your wives. Now, when you have 2 people in a marriage that's their perspective, I want the best for her. My perspective. I want the best for her. And I'm going to humble myself out of love for God. I'm going to humble myself and try and get the best for her. I want the best for her. That sound like a good husband? No? You don't even, what does that even look like? Is that what you're wondering? And at the same time, the wife wanting the best for her husband. So now I don't have to worry about getting what I need. She's going to do that for me. And I'm doing that for her. That's a picture of Christian marriage. That's the ideal. That's what we're striving for. But it takes humility, right? First to God, and then to each other. So, kind of going back full circle, talking about conflict. What is the win? All right? So all the way to the very essence of the conflict. What's the win when you're in a conflict? Is it getting your way? Is that the win? That you win, the other person loses? Is that the win? Here's the win. The win is that at the end of the conflict, that your words and your actions and your attitude demonstrate your love for God. That's the win. That at the end of the conflict, your words, your actions, your attitudes demonstrate your love for God. One of my all-time heroes, truly, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. entered into a national conflict. And as a result of his entering into it and being a point person in the midst of the civil rights struggle in this country, he received hostility, anger, attacks, both verbal and physical, as well as the people around him. But all the way through that, his focus was to demonstrate the love of God for all people. And so even when he lost struggles along the way, he was winning. And ultimately, his life forced us to, as a country, to look into a kind of mirror. And literally millions of people went, that's not who I am. That hatred, that violence, that fear, that's not who I am. That's not who we are. That was the win. And because he walked in that way, he moved the needle on that very difficult time toward greater inclusion for all Americans, right? So the win isn't that I get my way. The win isn't that I was victorious in this one struggle. This is a lifelong thing. This is an eternal thing. This is why I think conflict is a spiritual discipline. To go through conflict well is a spiritual discipline. So that's the win. In order to get the win, we need humility. We need to start from this perspective of me second. And in order to stay humble through a process, because conflict isn't usually just a one and done, you have a little argument and then it's over, right? A true conflict could take a long period of time. And so in this process of being in a conflict, I need to regularly check myself. What's going on inside of me? And that kind of humility, there's a process there as well, and I talked about it last week, to look in, to look up, and to look out. To look in, what's going on and what's stirring up in my heart right now? Is it right stuff? Is it stuff from the world? What's going on in me? And to ask God for God's guidance and direction. We talked about two Psalms that help us with this. Psalm 139. Test me, O God. Know me, O God. Test my heart. See if there be any offensive way in me. Psalm 51. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and a loyal spirit. So that's looking in, and it's looking up, and then looking out. What's going on with the other folks that I'm in conflict with? What's their perspective? What's at play for them? So that I'm trying to understand not just my own perspective, but their perspective as well. I'm looking out. I'm looking beyond myself. So all of that is the process, right? The internal process that you're doing as you enter into a conflict. You still haven't entered in, right? I mean, this is what you're doing. This is the internal work that you're doing. You're clear about the win. You've got this humility thing going on. You're checking your own heart. You're asking God to give you a clean heart. You're trying to understand the perspective of the other person. And then, in just kind of closing this out, Jesus gave us a model for entering into a conflict with the goal. Okay? So the goal for Jesus in a conflict is restoration of the relationship. Always. Jesus is about unity. He's about restoration. He's about loving relationships. Right? That's what Jesus was all about. That's what he was trying to lead us toward. And so when we're in conflict, Jesus said, here's what you need to do. The first thing you need to do, if you're in conflict with somebody, you need to go and meet with that person one-on-one. Now that sounds obvious, but that is the step that we so often miss, right? When we're in conflict. I mean, truth be told, that's often the last person you talk to, right? I mean, you talk to everybody else around. You talk to friends. You talk to family members. You talk to people who know people. You send emails and texts and, social media. And all of the, we talk to everybody but the person we're in conflict with. Jesus said it starts there. I was in a conflict with a pastor years ago, a pastor in another church. Something had happened that, it just ticked me off, and I thought did some damage to the church here, and I was angry, and I was grousing around about it and so forth. And after a couple of weeks of that, I realized I've got to go and talk with this guy. And so I set up a meeting, and I went to see him, and I just laid out, my perspective on this thing. And he said, "I am so sorry." He said, "The truth is, I haven't been in a good place for the last year. I haven't been involved. So what you're talking about, I didn't even know that took place. And I am so sorry. I should have been. It was my, and so that's the way the conversation went. I was ascribing all of these motives to him, all of this stuff on him that had nothing to do with his own life and what his perspective was. And I didn't know that until I had this one-on-one with him. It starts there. Okay? But that doesn't always go well, right? So just because you do that doesn't mean like, hey, it's all good. Right? I've had a lot of one-on-ones that I walked out and went, what just happened? Right? How did it go that way? So Jesus you're not off the hook, because restoration is still the goal. So Jesus says, in that case, get one or two other people and go back to that person, and the 3 or 4 of you try to work it through. Okay? Now, I've been in leadership a long time. I've been around a lot of people. I've been in a lot of conflict. And I've actually done this process a couple of times. And it is amazing how when you bring other people in and you're working through it, how sometimes there's a breakthrough, right? You would have missed it if you had just let it go after the one-on-one. But Jesus said, if that doesn't work, you're still not done, because restoration is the goal. In that case, he said, then go to the church. Go to the church. What would that look like, right? I got 2 chairs up here, sit them down. You guys are sitting out there, and we're trying to work this out. You're like yelling out stuff, thumbs up, thumbs down, booing, giving speeches, holding up cards with scores. No, I think what that looks like is you bring it to the leadership of the church. So we would have a process here to help people work through their conflict. We have a very gifted lead team of wise men and women. We even have officials from the denomination that we could bring in. all with the idea toward restoration, making this relationship whole, working through this conflict. Finally, Jesus says, if that doesn't work, then treat the person as a sinner or a tax collector. What's that mean? Like, finally, I get to go call this person what they really are. Sinner, tax collector. I always hate that because my dad was a tax collector. He worked for the state of New Jersey. But anyway, how did Jesus treat sinners and tax collectors? He loved them and desired to see them in a restored relationship with the Father. See, even if it goes really badly all the way through and there's no resolution, you don't come to an agreement, we're still on the hook to demonstrate love for that person. And when we do that, man, we just open up great opportunities for a great win. Because at the end of the day, it's not about winning the argument. It's about demonstrating through your words, through your actions, through your attitudes, your love for God. So our band is going to come up and lead us in a closing song. And as they do, this is challenging stuff, right? This is really difficult stuff. And that's why we don't do it very often, right? Because it's hard and it demands a lot of us. But that's our call. That's our opportunity. That's what makes the church different, or can, if we do this. But it takes each one of us committed to a process. And thank you for being a part of this place. And anytime that there's, conflict going on. By the way, let me just say, there's not a conflict going on. Sometimes I do these series or messages and people go, what is going on? Like, what's happening? What did I miss? There's nothing going on. We're good. All right? This is the best time to do it, though, right? When things are good, this is the best time to be talking about it so that we can refer back to it if we end up in times of conflict. Sorry, go ahead. Do your thing.